Consider the following, and some of the results you will hardly believe.
I am Elliot, Gavin, Keenan. I have about 98.5% of a PhD from UCLA in human development and psychology. My work focuses mainly on autism and bipolar disorder across the lifespan. I really like cats, and for my past 26 years as an autistic human on this earth, I have loved the Pokemon franchise more than life.
Hi everyone, my name is Gurba. I'm currently a master's student in neuroscience. I also do a lot of disability advocacy work. I'm autistic and I have a few other disabilities, mainly cerebral palsy.
And I have, as well as autism, bipolar disorder, and a bunch of other things. That's kind of why we're here today, to share our insights on psychological science as people who know that world from the inside out. We're going to do two things today. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to discuss a paper. This paper came out in Molecular Autism in 2020. And then we're going to do an activity where Ava and I clinically interview each other to get at our lived experiences and perspectives, and for you all to get to know us better. So first we're going to talk about the paper. The paper is titled Autistic Traits, Systemising, Empathising, and Theory of Mind in Transgender and Non-Binary Adults. And you know, whenever we start off with a transgender paper, it might not be pretty. We might be looking at
autism, transgender variants and autism. Yeah. The paper was authored by Carson T.F. Kung. Before we started recording, we were talking about how the author is based in Hong Kong, and whether that has any sort of influence in writing this paper and its perspectives, and whether that has any sort of importance in the way we consider these results.
I said no, it's not a get-home free card. You're the one who's claiming to be an expert on this topic, so you should actually know what you're talking about.
Well, and the standards, right? And this is an American journal.
And I mean, they did use language correctly, but
they used language correctly, right? But I think the flaw with this paper,
the flaws are in the ideas.
Well, the flaw in kind of the conceptualization, right, is it utilizes a lot of theories that I think many autistic people would say are inaccurate, potentially outdated. And the fact that it encompasses these theories within gender variants can be a very slippery slope.
Yeah, so basically this paper, what they did is they took a large sample of trans and non-binary people, and they gave them the AQ, and you're like, oh god, they gave them the AQ. That's a horrible start.
We should probably clarify what each one of these measures are. They used the autism quotient.
Quotient.
They surveyed 323 gender minority adults. Just generally, these are not individuals who were diagnosed as autistic. And they took these measures via an online survey. So the first measure is the AQ, and I believe they used the full measure AQ.
Yeah, they did. And they also used...
They used the short forms of the systemising quotient and the empathising quotient.
And also the 10-item version of the empathising quotient.
Yeah.
Which Ava is not sure why they did, and I'm not either.
And the reading the mind and the eyes test, which is another way of, which is a measure that examines kind of broader ideas of theory of mind.
It's really hard, if you've ever taken it. So basically what they did is they gave all of these people these online surveys, and then they compared transgender men and non-binary AFAB people, that's people who were assigned female at birth, and compared them to cisgender women. And then they took transgender women and AMAB, that's assigned male at birth, non-binary people, and compared them to cisgender men. And before I even get into the findings of this paper, I think one of the biggest weaknesses, and something they tried to tell us about, but didn't even do, is that they didn't do same-gender comparisons. We don't have the comparisons between transgender men and men, or transgender women and women.
But I think it's important to point out why they also did that. They state in the paper that, they're making these comparisons with these individuals with other studies that have previously examined it. And all of these studies have examined it on the basis of biological sex and not gender.
Yeah, but just because other studies did it that way doesn't mean it's the right way.
No, but it means that there's a bigger problem, right, within this field and with this side of research.
It really becomes apparent when they start making claims like they explicitly claim that they did not see feminizing in the transgender women. Well, you didn't compare them to women, so how can you say that they're the same or different from women? You didn't make that comparison. Or that transgender men are masculinized. Well, you didn't compare them to men. And it's really interesting that they make the claim explicitly that transgender women were not feminized, because transgender women scored significantly higher on both forms of the empathising quotient, which is more typical of women.
Of cisgender women.
Yeah.
Although women altogether.
They scored lower on the eyes test, which I think the eyes test is just trash, but...
Well, I have a point about that, because compared to their other measures, it showed the lowest internal consistency.
Oh, what was the internal consistency? Give me the Chrome Box Alpha.
So all the measures other than the eyes test were higher than 0.8.
That's good.
The eyes test had a consistency of 0.63.
That's not great.
Yeah, well, that's why I mentioned it to you earlier. I was like, what is usually a good internal consistency score?
Not that.
All the other measures are like 0.85, 0.86, 0.87. The highest one is the EQ short, the 22-item one, not the 10-item one, with a 0.93. But the eyes test was a 0.63 in this sample.
Yeah,
but they say that they all had good internal consistency, so they clearly did distinguish those measures.
But I think, Ava and I both agree the most problematic part of this study
Ellie, before you get there, we didn't even really talk about the theories they're trying to kind of, I think, prove.
Well, I think it might be outside the scope of this podcast. There are these etiological theories of autism, including the mind blindness theory or the theory of mind theory.
And the extreme male
brain theory.
Which is the systemizing, empathizing theory.
But I think we agree the biggest problem is that they find transgender men performed like men. And therefore, they say, extreme male brain theory is true. There is a theoretical chasm in between trans men performed like men and extreme male brain theory is true. Any concluding thoughts, Ava?
I mean, I think the important thing is what they're concluding, right? Because they're trying to basically show evidence of both this mind blindness theory and this extreme male brain theory, right? And so clearly they might be conflating gender and biological sex to do that.
Yeah, and it feels almost like they're, like, politically motivated to say that there was no feminization of transgender women when their results suggest that's not the case. Now we're going to move on to our second activity for today's podcast, and that is going to be a clinical interview. I'll be interviewing Ava for a few minutes, and then Ava will be interviewing me. So, Ava.
Yes.
When did you first notice that you were different than most other people?
Just generally, or like in relation to one or both of the things that I mentioned earlier?
Generally?
Generally? I mean, pretty young. I would say probably by kindergarten I at least had a general sense of it. I mean, prior to that, right, how much exposure did I have to other peers? It was preschool, but how much of that do I remember? I mean, I was in a special ed preschool, so those comparisons might be different. But I felt probably I started feeling like I was different from other people, right? Like that's what we're saying by like the time I was 5. When did I become like hugely aware of this? Probably later in elementary school. Like when did these differences become problematic? And like I was being bullied and things like that. Probably like 3rd or 4th grade.
What would you say has been the hardest part of having these diagnoses and these problems in life?
I mean, I think they come down to different points for different disabilities, right? I mentioned that I had cerebral palsy and I'm autistic. I also had mental health challenges. But I think for my cerebral palsy, it's always been the judgment that I can to do things physically. Like I think I've told you before that like I was presumed that I cannot be in a musical sort of setting because I can't play an instrument because I have differences on my right side in terms of physical ability. So I was completely prevented from doing that. And there have been many circumstances in my life, I think, where physically I've just been not allowed to try things because I have a disability, and to allow me to do those things might mean that I need to be accommodated. In terms of my autism, I mean, I think I've always been kind of grossly aware, and I think the biggest thing is judgment. But I mean, I feel like with my autism, the social differences have always been they're kind of an interesting challenge because I feel both like it's my fault and I'm different in that way, and so there's just something inherently different about me. But also I think there's a lot of judgment made against me. In some ways similar to the cerebral palsy, which is like, oh, she can't do things. But I think it's also very different because we're talking about something that is uniquely intangible, and therefore we're often talking about social contexts and that I won't be able to do something because I can't engage in particular ways with others.
Is there anything that you can do better because of your disabilities?
I like to say that my biggest thing with cerebral palsy is I have a better sense of problem solving and a better sense of space, and sometimes I'm way better at picking out ways that I can do things in a normal way, even if it requires some sort of assistance, and how to accommodate that. I think with my autism, I can be very detail-oriented, and I think that has been consistently shown to be a benefit across many autistic people in certain contexts.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're gonna flip it to Elliot, and I'm gonna ask him a few questions. So Elliot, I've known you for a long time, so I know that this is really for the audience more than it is for me. But when did you first notice you were different? I'm gonna kind of ask you the same question. And also, did this have an impact on your well-being?
I didn't really. Well, I don't know. I felt like I was sort of like socially not very well accepted in like preschool and kindergarten, but I didn't really think that there was like some like condition that I had or anything until they told me that I had a condition when I was 6, that I had autism. Well, it was called Asperger's back then, or to some people it was called PDD-NOS, depends on who you ask. I got diagnosed like a few times because my parents sought a second opinion. Um, and so I guess I got told when I was 6 that I was different, and I embraced that, I would say, and I started to learn more about autism, and I was okay with being autistic, and it kind of at some points helped me in later years when I was being bullied. I wasn't always proud to be autistic. There are times when it was actually kind of a secret, but it did give me some amount of comfort that there were other people that were like me out there, and that there was like a name for whatever condition it is that I have.
What about your bipolar, though? Because your bipolar came much later in life. You know, and I know that I think carries a lot of different kind of connotations and stigma around it compared to autism, especially today, but...
When you think about it, it's crazy. It wasn't really actually that much older. Because I started having depression at like 9. So there was... and I was being evaluated for autism at 6 and 7 years old. I crossed my 7th birthday, I was still being evaluated. So we're really talking like 2 years.
But I mean, you couldn't get a bipolar diagnosis at 9.
No, because my parents didn't believe in medication. So they didn't seek diagnosis or anything. And I didn't really disclose to anyone a lot of what I was going through. But I did realize that I was different. I would say, you know, I was depressed starting at like 9, and I would say by the time I was 11, I was like writing suicide notes on my personal blog, and by that point I realized that there was something different about me in terms of my psychiatric health, and I figured out within a few years of that I had sort of cyclical sleep patterns, that I would sleep much longer and much shorter at different times, and that it went in sort of a periodic cycle. And I sort of predicted that I would have a manic episode within a few years. And I was actually right. And when I was 16, I had my first manic episode. And you know, the rest is history.
Yeah, I think you've had a very good sense over your lifetime about kind of what's been going on, and unfortunately it hasn't been recognized by others, and getting the level of support is difficult, which is often a challenge for many people. My second question, though, which is maybe going more on the positive, is how has these things impacted you professionally, or, you know, occupationally, or even in terms of hobbies and what you like to do and what you are doing?
Well, I mean, professionally, obviously, I study the disorders that I have been identified as having myself. I'm what Matt Lerner calls a me searcher.
Who's Matt Lerner?
Matt Lerner is our advisor. Or he was my mentor. I don't know who he is to me now. He's just some guy, I guess. And I think, it's very funny. I have to adapt my working habits to fit into sort of my cyclical rhythm. So, like, when I write a paper, usually I'll write it all at once, and it will be, like, I won't sleep for 3 days, but it'll be done really fast. And then, most of the time, I do, like, absolutely nothing. And somehow this has worked out for me, but I think I'm gonna have to start changing my work habits because I've been more stable lately and I just am stuck in doing nothing.
Well, this is what we've been talking about.
Yeah, this is current news with Elliot Keenan.
I think this leads into my last question, though. And, you've disclosed a lot in the last few minutes about, like, your story, and I'm wondering, is there anything that you would change about kind of your history, as well as, like, the way you've kind of reacted and adapted to it, and in many ways it's become a strength of yours. But is there anything you would change about
I would bring back hypomania. Hypomania needs to come back.
Like your hypomania?
My hypomania.
Because I'm like, hypomania is a construct in other people, but we're not talking about other people.
We need to bring back Elliot Keenan's hypomania so that he can get
but not
stuff
mania.
done.
Not
no,
mania.
not mania. Not mania. Hypomania. I think that's a wrap. So thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll be back with another episode soon. And
do we have to give our socials or anything? Are we supposed to?
Like our Twitters? Yeah. I'm Zephyr Specs.
You might want to spell that for them.
ZEPHYRSPECS.
My personal Twitter is Ava Nicole 23, but with a hyphen. So specifically, it's capital A V A _ NICOLE 23, and that's where you can find me on Twitter.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.